we're talking about a country 2 times plus the size of Iraq. I like to say if the war in Iraq was junior varsity, a war with Iran would be the varsity leagues. And so President Biden, he is doing well as commander in chief, and he is seen as doing well, but he's getting pressure both from the left and the right.
Lord Cameron is back in the Middle East on his 4th visit to the region since he was appointed Foreign Secretary in November. He's holding talks in Oman as tensions rise across the region after the strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen and the attack which killed 3 US servicemen at a base in Jordan. Lord Cameron has said Palestinians should be given a political horizon to encourage peace in the Middle East. He told the Conservative Middle East Council Britain's ready to bring forward the moment when it formally recognises a Palestinian state. Well, his remarks come after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stressed his opposition to an independent Palestinian state, saying his country needs full security control over the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. Well, Joel Rubin is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration and joins us now. Good evening to you, Joel.
Hey, good evening, Carol.
Really good to have you with us. Just tell us, first of all, what you make of these remarks of Lord Cameron's coming at a pretty delicate moment.
Isn't it, though? And, look, he's right. I mean, David Cameron is hitting the nail on the head. A 2-state solution is the only way to have true peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. And what he's saying should not be controversial. This is policy, the policy of the United States for decades. This is the policy of Great Britain. This, frankly, was a policy position that Prime Minister Netanyahu himself accepted about a decade ago, although he had caveats about it. So the pressure is on Israel right now regarding this. And this end state, this goal of a Palestinian state is not in conflict with Israel's ability to defend itself against Hamas and to conduct this war. In fact, it actually provides an end game for the Palestinian people to see that lack of support for Hamas, that not supporting Hamas can be in their self-interest and in their long-term objective of having independence and autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, it has been the long-standing position, as you point out, of both the United States and the UK to work towards a 2-state solution. And at one stage, there were actually active negotiations that were leading towards this. Isn't part of the problem that it is because that diplomatic process was so far off the agenda that it has allowed Hamas to reach that position? And of course, we're now in the conflict that we're in.
I don't think it's necessarily the cart before the horse, as we like to say here in the United States, where one led to another. Hamas itself has been a rejectionist of peace for decades. I remember back, I'm sure you do too, that in the mid-90s, when Shimon Peres was prime minister of Israel and he had won a Nobel Peace Prize alongside Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, when he was negotiating with the Palestinians, Hamas came in and blew up buses in Tel Aviv, killing innocent Israelis and really undermining peace. So I think for this idea of having negotiations and getting to an end state, it's going to require unified Palestinian politics. It's going to require political will from the international community. It's also going to require Israelis feeling secure, that it will provide true security. And that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu is exploiting cynically right now, is the insecurity of the Israeli people. And he's using that to say, therefore, you can never have a Palestine. Well, that's just the kind of thinking that will keep Israel and the Palestinians in perpetual conflict. And it's not the kind of thinking that will get them moving to a better day where all sides have security.
I mean, it is interesting, the timing, though, because the Israelis, as we've been saying, Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very clear he wants to retain security control over all the Palestinian territories. The US and the UK have been very careful to try to support Israel to recognise its right, as they put it, to defend itself after the October the 7th attack. And one of the newspapers here in London in the morning says David Cameron didn't clear the 2-state solution speech with number 10. I mean, is there a sense that he might be freelancing a bit too much, maybe sticking his neck out and trying to push this at a time when it's just rather a sensitive issue?
Well, Carol, dust off my British history here. There was a former prime minister who then became foreign secretary a bit over a century ago, Lord Balfour, who wrote a declaration to the Jewish people saying that the Jewish people should have a homeland in Palestine. This would not be unprecedented for what David Cameron is doing to call for a similar outcome for the Palestinians. And so I think it's in the British tradition, quite frankly, to have a foreign secretary who was a former prime minister go a little bit rogue in trying to push the envelope in the Middle East. And I know as an American Jew and a supporter of Israel, that declaration was an astonishing moment of the Jewish world and a beautiful moment for those of us who support Israel. It really did change the world and create the conditions for the state of Israel, and that the Palestinians, they do deserve that same future as well.
Interesting to bring that historical perspective to it, of course, because this entire conflict is so entrenched in what has happened in
Yes.
previous decades and centuries. But isn't part of the problem at the moment the lack of any Palestinian leadership that would be acceptable to the Israelis? I mean, that is one of the fundamental problems, isn't it? And I mean, the fact that Hamas was in control of Gaza even before the war.
Yeah, look, you're not going to find any Palestinian pollster telling you that the current leadership, Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, has any plurality, any support at all amongst the people. He doesn't. And the Palestinian Authority is seen as widely ineffective and corrupt. But that's what we have. And it's crucial to work with what we have and to provide an opportunity for the Palestinian government as well to create the kinds of reforms and democratic programs that will produce a leader that will not only serve peace in the region, but also serve the Palestinian people in their economic development. I think the tragedy that we saw with Gaza is that there was a window where the Israelis left Gaza and enabled it to be its own contained area governed by Palestinians. And within a year, Hamas conducted a coup and overthrew the Palestinian Authority after Hamas had won the municipal election, I should note. So it's not like there's lack of blame on either side. But then, and since then, they've been running it as an autocratic regime, a fundamentalist regime. They've been killing Palestinians as well who oppose them. And they've launched successive wars against Israel that have brought a calamity to the people of Gaza. So there's a failure of leadership without a doubt amongst the Palestinians. But all that said, I doubt that there is not one single human being amongst the Palestinians who can govern and govern effectively. It's crucial that we continue to try to build that capacity so the Palestinians can govern themselves.
Do you think that this is going to make it more or less difficult for David Cameron to at least try to play a part in bringing about a further pause in hostilities? We know that the US has been involved in talks with Egypt, with Qatar, trying to bring about another pause that could allow the release of more of those Israeli and American hostages that are still being held by Hamas.
Well, I don't think it's going to endear him to the current Israeli leadership, the prime minister. But I also don't think that all of Israel will reject that. In fact, there are many significant figures in the Israeli political elites and national security establishment who agree with that sentiment. So he has to keep on keeping on. Britain is a great friend of Israel, a strong supporter of Israel in the United Nations. It has a long historic relationship, as we discussed, which is important to continue to bring up. And so it will put him a little bit on the outs potentially, but I think that's what he's doing is he's creating what we call in Washington political space now for this idea of Palestine being recognized. And this is not just in Britain. There is a debate happening here in Washington as well about this and if and when to do that. But clearly there is a recognition that Israel needs to be on board, and that's the challenge. If Israel is not on board, it could potentially backfire or prevent it from coming about. But talking about it certainly helps to open up the aperture about the opportunities for peace and security in the region.
And this comes as President Biden has said he's made a decision as to how he's going to respond
Yeah.
to that attack on US that killed three US troops in Jordan. Of course, he hasn't told us what that's going to be. What sort of response would you expect him to deliver?
Well, my sense right now is that the president, he's a grizzled veteran of multiple wars in the Middle East, where the United States has made tragic mistakes, but he also is a strong supporter of our forces overseas. He personally understands his son Bo was in the military. He understands how crucial it is to protect our troops in the field, and as the commander in chief, he's obligated to respond to protect our forces who are appropriately stationed in the Middle East. But I think he's going to try to send a message with this response that is making it clear to Iran, because they are truly the ones behind these multiple proxy groups, that they need to cool it and that this is going too far, that Iran is the one that is creating the regional chaos that we're witnessing. Israel has a war with Hamas. That has created major dynamics that we are talking about today. But Iran and its proxies are the ones that are actually attacking the American forces in this instance, and they need to cool it and act more like other countries in the region, like Egypt and Qatar, for example, and Saudi Arabia, who are trying to find diplomatic paths to de-escalation. Iran is doing the opposite, and I think that's the kind of message that the president's going to try to communicate through a strike that is focused on those who committed the act, as well as sending a strong diplomatic message that this is going on too long and too far.
And do you think that we are in an election year there in the United States? We've already got plenty of Republicans trying to seize on this. Donald Trump saying, well, this attack wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for President Biden's weak leadership, as he put it. Does this make
COVID
the calculations?
Wouldn't have happened if he was president either, I'm sure. So I'm sorry.
Indeed.
You know.
But it is playing straight into the election battle ahead. Does that make the calculation over how to respond more difficult?
Well, you know, Americans don't vote on foreign policy as the core issue that makes them decide who they want as their next commander in chief. But it is a threshold issue. It is a competency question. And President Trump, he will continue to try to make the argument that President Biden's competency is not there. But, you know, they tried that on Afghanistan, and certainly it took President Biden's numbers took a hit. But Americans wanted out of Afghanistan, and Americans do not want another major war in the Middle East, a war of choice, certainly not. And with Iran, we're talking about a country 2 times plus the size of Iraq. I like to say if the war in Iraq was junior varsity, a war with Iran would be the varsity leagues. And so President Biden, he is doing well as commander in chief, and he is seen as doing well, but he's getting pressure both from the left and the right. And the left is mad at him for supporting Israel, and the right is always going to try to up the ante and call for war with Iran in this instance. I think it's to keep on keeping on. Donald Trump has a lot to answer for, including, and I want to add this, the question should be answered as to, are we more secure now because he ripped up a major multilateral diplomatic agreement to constrain Iran's nuclear program, or are we worse off? I'd argue we're worse off. Iran is closer to a bomb now than it ever has been, and that's directly because of Donald Trump. And that also puts us at a disadvantage when trying to tell Iran to knock it off.
Joel Rubin, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Really good to speak to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carol.